Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, studenten. We are going to delve a bit into the mythos of Cain and Abel, and we're going to find out that it's only the Hebrew version of a universal myth of the rivals, the two brothers, one of whom kills the other. And like the Eden myth, this is a foundational myth. And the purpose of myth, remember, is not so much to tell us what happened way back when. If it happened, it didn't. It's a story. Whether these things are factual or not doesn't matter. But to tell us the way things are today, to explain the world to us. We have myths today. We have all kinds of stories that explain the modern scientific world and where we can go from here and all of that. And we think we're listening to facts all the time, but in fact, these are constructs, and that's why people argue over them. Should we wear masks or not? Should we take a vaccine or not? There's this other mythic element here. This will fix us if we use it. Oh, this will kill us if we use it. Both groups could find evidence and they claim it's all fact. They're mindsets generally. And a mindset is what creates a myth. Well, let's look at myth once again. Myths have one message, primarily. Order triumphs over chaos. There is a clash between order and chaos. We all know that. People get sick, people die, people fall off roofs, people have automobile accidents, chaos. And then say it's all right, we get fixed up, go to the hospital, and now order is hopefully reestablished. Myths function on 4 levels, according to the neo-Jungian school. And Jung was, as you know, a student of Freud's. Number 1, we must be assured that there is cosmic order, that the planets go around and don't bang into each other, that there is a God in charge of everything in most of these myths, or gods, that ultimately bring order. And when their gods are fighting, then you have Zeus to figure out, hopefully, which way to go. Now, in our Judeo-Christian tradition, we have one God, and he's ultimately the source of order. And order on 4 levels. The myths talk about order triumphing over chaos. We have to believe that. There may be a flood, but the waters will recede and things will get back to normal. I may get sick, but I'll get better. Ultimately, we don't get better, but we have a long life, hopefully, before that. So order triumphs over chaos. Number 1 in the cosmos. God's going to fix things. Order will come. Then in nature. Again, we may have a flood, but it'll recede. Then in the society, we may have a revolution, we may have an insurrection, we may have a war, but ultimately order will be restored. And 4th, psychologically, in here, if I believe, and I believe the foundational myths of my society, if I believe that there's order in the cosmos and the planets aren't going to smash into each other, and I believe that there is order in nature, that you may have a lot of rain, but it'll stop and order will be restored. And I believe there is order in society. Despite revolutions and wars, we can be restored to order. Then psychologically, I'm going to be in a good place. There'll be order here because there's order all around me. Myths assure us of that order on those 4 levels. Not all of them function on all 4 levels, but many of them actually do. We look at the Garden of Eden myth. God's plan seems to be disturbed. Remember, God created the world. There is water above and water beneath, and we are in the middle. And he put the waters up there and down there. Otherwise, there'd be nothing but a watery abyss. He made room for humanity. Now that goes back to Marduk killing Tiamat, the dragon of chaos. And he cuts her body, and she represents the watery abyss, the chaos that preceded creation. And he puts half of her up here and half of her down here, the water that comes down in rain and the seas. But now the water is orderly. The seas don't always, there's not always a tsunami. When there is, it makes headlines. Most of the time, the seas behave themselves. But that's chaos, and it can rain 10 inches, it's not going to rain 1,000 inches. It'll happen once, it's not going to happen again. We'll get to the Noah story. God promised never again. So that ancient Mesopotamian myth is echoed in the creation myth in the Bible, where the waters are above and the waters are beneath. But every once in a while, chaos is going to strike in the form of a tsunami or a hurricane or an earthquake in Turkey. Chaos is waiting, always waiting to come back, and God has to push it away. The snake in the Garden of Eden, a rival god worshipped by many people in the Middle East. But that one of the functions of that myth in the Garden of Eden is to put down serpent worship and say, no, God is God, this invisible force, that's God, and this God is down in the dust. That's one function of the Eden myth. Another is to say, to tell us why we today are not immortal. Another is to tell us why we make bad choices. Adam got us into a bad habit. And God had to alter his plan. I find it charming to think of God being surprised. It's later on that we say God is omniscient. He knows everything at once, the future, the past, and all that. Maybe he didn't originally. Maybe he had to learn. Maybe he still doesn't. But when Adam and Eve sin, and he says to Adam, where are you? I was hiding because I was naked. Who told you you were naked? Maybe he doesn't know. Maybe it's not, these are not rhetorical questions. Well, the serpent did it. Well, man passes the buck. We pass the buck today. We never want to take responsibility for what we do. We say, oh, the woman did it, or the snake did it, or somebody else did it. Not my fault. These are things that happen every day. They happened in the Garden of Eden. Adam got us into that habit of disobedience and passing the buck, and we do it today. That's why we do it today. Why is childbirth painful? Meaning it stands for all the pain in life. Why is there so much pain in life? Well, there wasn't supposed to be in God's original plan, but then he threw us out of the Garden of Eden. He had to do that because if he hadn't thrown us out of the Garden of Eden, now being rivals to God, we would eat of the tree of eternal life and become rival gods. He couldn't have that, so he throws us out. So that's why there's pain in the world, represented by the woman's pain in childbirth, but it represents all pain. And the man has to work. So why do I have to work so hard? Well, you didn't in Eden, but you screwed that up, so now you do. Why is there enmity between snakes and people? In other words, why are there hostile elements in nature? Well, when we got together with the snake, look, we ganged up on God, so he's got to keep us separate. That represents all those hostile elements. That's why things are the way they are. Next time you're bitten by a mosquito, it's our own fault. There weren't any mosquitoes in the Garden of Eden. They certainly would have been mentioned, but they weren't. But here we have them. I don't have them because I live right across the street from the river, and the wind, the breeze blows them away. But I'm the exception in Charleston. All right, these myths establish order, but remember, chaos is always waiting to come back. And we know that from our own lives. Now look at the next story, Cain and Abel. Cain brings whatever he has lying around. There are people who give gifts like that even today. Abel brings the best thing he's got, his finest sheep. And of course, God has regard to Abel's sacrifice, but not to Cain's. There's no great mystery why. And Cain, God sees that Cain is contemplating something terrible. So he says to him, Why has your countenance fallen? Remember, we're made of dust and the Spirit of God. When people in the Bible look up, they're looking in the right direction. When they look down to the dust, they're about to do something bad. That's where Satan, that's where the serpent is. Forget I said Satan. He's not identified as Satan until much later. And he says, Cain, you don't have to do this. If you just do like your brother, you'll be all right. Give me the best stuff you've got. Well, whenever you tell a guy to be like his brother or his sister and be nice, he's not going to like that. And God says, but if you don't, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, but you can master it. In other words, chaos is always there. Now it's seen as a kind of big animal crouching right at the door of our heart, about to devour us. But Cain, you don't have to let that happen. You have free will. Even after the Garden of Eden, you have free will. You can conquer it if you put your mind to it. So all these elements that we're always tempted by, that animal crouching at the door, the personification of chaos coming back. Chaos is going to come back here. But we don't have to give in to it. We have free will. And the Bible insists on that. No excuses. You've got free will. But Cain misuses the free will again, as Adam did, and that, for the Hebrews, was the source of sin, the misuse of God-given free will. And he kills his brother. Now, Cain, this myth functions on many levels. Cosmically, it upsets God. God says, what have you done? The voice of your brother's blood calleth unto me from the ground. Dom, blood, one of the symbols of life in the Bible, which is why when you eat kosher, you drain the blood. The life belongs to God. Another symbol of life is nephesh, the breath. Two symbols, but here it's Dom. The life of your brother calls to me from the ground. And Cain says, oh, am I my brother's keeper? What a question. I would say, in a way, yes. Now, President Reagan put it better, I think. He said, I'm not my brother's keeper, but I am my brother's brother. Keeper has a kind of superior tone to it. And the one you think you're the keeper of may resent that, but you're his brother. And you owe him respect and love. Love your neighbor. If you love your neighbor, well, love your brother. It's even closer. Cain fails to do that, and he commits a terrible sin. Well, we do this all the time. Now, let's see how it functions. Cosmically, God is very upset and distressed. What have you done? And the answer, God is sorrowful. Remember, when God wipes out the whole world in Noah's flood, it doesn't say he's angry. It says he's sorrowful. This is a God who is in pain. When you get to the prophets, you find in Jeremiah, especially in Hosea, God is in pain. In Jeremiah, God is our father, and our children, his children, that's us, are acting badly, and he's suffering. Jeremiah has been called the suffering prophet of a suffering God. In the prophet Hosea, and we studied all of this in this course in months gone by since April of 2020 when we started this, we went through all these prophets. In Hosea, God is Israel's husband. And his wife, Israel, meaning us, the Israelites, are acting badly. He's in pain. And heaven knows in Christianity, you have a suffering God hanging on a cross because of the sins of humanity. God is not this aloof thing up there. God is here, and he suffers the consequences of our misdeeds. Do we suffer the consequences? Yes, but he suffers with us. Why? Because he loves us. And when you love someone, you're stuck with them. At one point, Jeremiah's God said, if I could only get away from Jerusalem and have a little house in the country, but I can't because these are my people. Jerusalem's going to be destroyed, and I have to be there with them and suffer every moment of it. the suffering of God, the pathos of God. Rabbi Heschel wrote a book, God in Search of Man. It's not that we seek out God, God seeks us. Where are you, he asks us, as he asked Adam in the Garden of Eden. And we hide. Because we don't want these responsibilities. We don't want to answer for our actions. We want to do what we feel like doing. That was Adam's sin. Whatever I feel like doing, I can do and call it right. And never mind that God's standards of right and wrong. It's a story of history. We may not inherit the guilt of Adam on this, but many people believe we do. We certainly inherit the patterns of his conduct. So myth is functioning here on the cosmic level. When God finds out what Cain has done and he's warned him against it, he's sorrowful. And his creation, first of all, it was supposed to be the Garden of Eden, and then Adam and Eve messed that up. And now he's got Cain and Abel, and Cain messes that up. Adam failed. Cain has failed. In a way, God may feel he's failing. It's not working. So God, on the cosmic level of this myth, is distressed. Chaos has entered. On the social level, what is this myth telling us? Well, the Israelites were originally shepherds, and then they became farmers as they settled down in Canaan. But they look back on their shepherding history as something noble, something that wasn't tied to one place. The shepherd wanders the earth, the whole world is his. And although they desired homes and farms, they look back on this pristine, semi-Edenic existence that has now been swept away by the farmers. Cain was a farmer, and he kills Abel. The agricultural kills the shepherding tradition in Israel. So sociologically, we're being told something. In terms of naturalistically, the blood of Abel seeps into the ground and pollutes it, and God banishes Cain from the face of the ground. So it functions naturalistic. And of course, psychologically, Cain said, I can't bear God said, you're going to be far away from me. And Cain said, I can't bear it. It's too terrible for me. So chaos has entered on all four of these levels: cosmic, sociological, naturalistic, and psychological. And Cain goes off to wander. Now, what I want to do now, we'll comment on Cain and how he found his wife, which is a peculiar thing. Where did she come from? But first, I want to put this myth in the context of the larger world of myths, thousands of them all over the world. And I've put together just some that I've come across of the rival brothers where one brother kills the other. This myth recurs over and over again. Now, Rabbi Heschel used to say, the fact that Cain kills Abel, his brother, indicates that every homicide is a fratricide, because we're all brothers. That's what this myth is telling us. And brothers and sisters, and we have to look out for each other. Life is difficult. We have to help each other through it, not kill each other. But we often choose the latter, like as Cain did. But this idea of sibling rivalry leading to fratricide is found all over the ancient world of myth, because it's the way we are now. We do it all the time. The Ukrainians and the Russians are literally brothers. And look what's going on there. South and North Korea, same people, hate each other. If they might end up fighting with each other. We're all brothers. It's we and everybody else, and we kill each other. And these myths tell us that's virtually inevitable. All right, let's look at the twin rival theme, which is so universal. The Hebrew version here is Cain killing Abel. Let's look at Roman myth, Romulus and Remus. This is their story in short. These are twin brothers. Their mother was a mortal. Their father was Mars, the god of war. So they were semi-divine. They were abandoned to die for complex reasons. They were rescued and famously suckled by a wolf who took them in, a mother wolf. And the symbol of Rome is the wolf, and Romulus and Remus are sucking at her teeth. They grew up not knowing their semi-divine origin, but they grew up to be leaders. And in a political dispute, Remus is taken prisoner. And Romulus loved him so that he organizes a rescue mission and he freed him. And the two set out to found a new city. They arrived at the 7 hills, but one of them wanted to create the city on the Palatine Hill. And you've visited Rome, you know what I'm talking about. And the other wanted to do it on another hill. And they argued about which hill to build the city on. And Romulus killed his brother Remus over that and went on to found Rome. Romulus kills his brother Remus over a dispute over where they're going to build the city and who would be the founder. Jealousy, like Cain and Abel. All right, that's Rome. Let's look at Egypt. And that's the foundational myth of Rome. Here's a story for you. Osiris is the god king of Egypt. He is married to his sister, wife, Isis. They did that in Egypt. And he brings, remember, he's a god, but he's also the king of Egypt. So he's functioning cosmically and to bring order, and sociologically as king, and now agriculturally. He brings agriculture to Egypt. He shows them how to cultivate the land around the Nile. And it benefits his people. He's a good god because he's a god of order. Now, if you look at Egypt, it's a great big square, but the only cultivatable land is on either side, very narrow, on either side of the Nile River. That's why in Hebrew, Mitzrayim, land of Egypt, means a narrow place, because the livable area of Egypt is very narrow. Osiris represents the cultivated area of Egypt around the Nile and all the vegetables and fruits and wonderful things they produce. But he has a brother who represents the heat of the desert and the nothingness of the desert. And his name is Set, or he's sometimes called Seth. And he invites his brother Osiris to a banquet, and he murders him. The heat of the desert, you see the natural level, chaos is impinging on the cultivated area. Chaos in the cosmos, one god kills another. Chaos in the society, the king of Egypt is now dead. Chaos in nature, the desert is always ready to impinge upon the cultivated area, the desertization. We're faced with that now, with global warming, the desertization of formerly cultivated land. A great danger. Seth is still at it. So we contemplate global warming, a time when this planet may be uninhabitable. Chaos. Now it's orderly. We fear it won't always be if these trends continue. We fear chaos. So Seth kills Osiris, and he chops his body up and buries the pieces all over Egypt, so we can never come back together again. Now, one ending of the story is that Osiris' faithful wife, Isis, finds the pieces, and she binds them together with gauze and mummifies him and brings him to life. She flaps her wings. A goddess has wings, of course. She flaps her wings over him and he comes back to life. But he becomes the king of the underworld, the king of the dead. That's one answer, one ending. But it has another ending in which the pieces of Osiris remain scattered, but from them springs wheat, from the buried pieces of the god. And the followers of Osiris would engage in a curious ritual. They would cut the wheat and they would make it into beer and bread. And they drank the beer, the blood of the god. And they ate the bread, the body of the god. And there, in this way, order was restored. Even though chaos had killed order, order comes back in the lives of the disciples of Osiris. Well, that may sound familiar because when Christianity was starting in the first century, a lot of these ancient myths, the Osiris myth is much older, but these ancient myths made a comeback, mainly dying and resurrecting gods. Attis, Adonis, Tammuz, Mithras. They die and they come back. And the Osiris religion became a rival to Christianity. And Christianity, it may be more than a coincidence that the development of communion, that you take the blood and the body of the murdered god into you and you get eternal life. That's what the Osiris religion promised. It was a rival to Christianity. Now, Christianity grew at a much greater pace than Judaism. Judaism at that time was also trying to convert people. But Christianity did it in a way that succeeded. Rather than resist these patterns, they would incorporate them. And many ancient goddesses became saints. And the pattern is very interesting. And the result was Christianity conquered the West and Judaism fell far behind because it wouldn't do that. It resisted all this stuff. And well, there are other reasons. They insisted on circumcision and there were certain particular tendencies. But Christianity incorporated these patterns and came up with their own version. Now, Judaism did the same thing. The Garden of Eden story, the loss of immortality in a perfect garden, that's not an invention of the Jews, but the Jews stuck in the second tree, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, because that's what Israelites do. They take an ancient myth, adapt it, and they throw in an ethical dimension, which is so central. So we both do it. But by the first century, Judaism was more fixed. Christianity was just developing. And they were able to adapt some of the Osiris patterns into the practice of Christianity. And Judaism had done that earlier. All religions do this. This is no criticism. A religion that wants to grow will build on earlier mythos and create its own, but change it. For example, it says in the Bible clearly that Beth-El was a sacred Jewish city because Jacob had an encounter with God there, but it said it was already a holy city. And the Jews just took it over. Rome was a holy city. Vatican Hill was a sacred place of a pagan temple, and the Christians took it over. That's what religions do. They update earlier mythos. So let's go on to the story of Osiris, or actually I finished it. So order won out because the people were able to ingest the essence of the god and keep his teachings going and have agriculture and all, and resist Set, the heat of the desert, which was impinging on them from either side. But there still is that cultivated land in Egypt. All right, let's look at Greek myth. But the point is, Seth kills his brother Osiris. Brother kills brother, in this case, gods. In Greek myth, Medea kills her brother over the golden fleece. She wants Jason, her boyfriend, to have the golden fleece, so she kills her brother. In Thebes, Polynices, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, is killed by his brother in a conflict over who's going to rule Thebes. Brother kills brother over dominance. In the Nordic myth, one of the gods, I may be pronouncing it incorrectly, Hoor, H-O-O-R, kills his brother Baldur. Fratricide again. In the Arthurian legends, the Idylls of the King, Sir Balin kills his brother Sir Balin in a duel. Hindu myth, the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata is a fantastic book. It's like the Bible. It's filled with the most marvelous stories of gods and demigods and all the great truths of mythology are found there as they are in the Bible. The Hindu religion is worthy of our greatest respect. It really, this is a great epic, the Mahabharata. And in that, the Pandavas, who are 5 brothers, gods, 4 of them gang up on their brother Karna, and they kill him. And I'm not going to get into the long story. It's too far away. It's way over in India, but it's there too. The point is that this is universal. And back with British history, the history of the ancient kings of Britain, one brother, Porrex, kills Ferrex over a dispute about who was going to rule Britain. Back to the Bible. Isaac and Ishmael have a great conflict. And Ishmael is forced to leave the camp taken by his mother Hagar, because Sarah won't have 2 heirs in the camp. And who knows what would have happened if Hagar hadn't left. And of course, Ishmael, God takes care of him too. He becomes the father of the Arab peoples, and Isaac the father of the Israelites. And then Jacob and Esau. It's almost fratricide. Jacob cheats Esau out of his birthright over a bowl of porridge, and then deceives his father Isaac into stealing Esau's blessing, the blessing of the elder son. And it says Esau was going to kill him. But Rebecca, the mother, says to Isaac, to Jacob, you've got to flee. I don't want to lose both my children in one day. In other words, if Esau kills you, he then would be worthy of death. I've lost him, and I've lost you, you'd be dead. So Jacob flees for 20 years to get away from Esau's wrath, near fratricide. And the final example, which really isn't myth, it probably is historic. In the book of Samuel, David's son Absalom kills his half-brother Amnon for raping his sister Tamar. He actually kills him, and that's probably a historical account. So this theme of fratricide is an illustration of the homicide that goes on all the time, because if we're all brothers and sisters, every homicide is a fratricide. And it began with Cain and Abel. So we begin with a perfect myth in the Garden of Eden, which goes wrong. Then it goes wrong again out in the world. Adam fails, Cain fails. Let's see what other failures we have. Because we're now going to enter into a spiraling down of evil and chaos until it gets so bad, finally, in the 9th chapter of Genesis, that God sends a flood to wipe everybody out. Things are turning from bad to worse. All right, put on the light so I can read the text. I have my Bible here. I hope you do too. Am I my brother's keeper? Here's the curse that God puts on Cain. This is chapter 4, verse 11. And now you are cursed from the ground, which had opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you till the ground, it will no longer yield to you its strength. Now, it already wasn't perfect because of Adam's sin, but now it's going to get even more resistant to your efforts as a farmer. In other words, you won't be able to be a farmer. When you till the ground, it shall no longer yield to you its strength. You shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth. And Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, thou hast driven me this day away from the ground, and from thy face to be exiled from to live without God is unbearable. And from thy face I shall be hidden. It doesn't say God will hide his face from Cain. It says Cain is hiding his face from God. It's not God's problem that we can't find him. We don't look for him. He's looking for us, and we are hidden. I'll be a wanderer, and whoever will find me will slay me. Then the Lord said to him, not so. If anyone slays Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. He'll be punished 7 times worse than death, whatever that may mean. And the Lord put a mark on Cain, lest anyone come upon him and kill him. Then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord. What a terrible sentence. To be without meaning, to be without order, to just wander aimlessly. And dwelt in the land of Nod, which means wandering, east of Eden. Well, the mark of Cain comes down to us as a mark of a fratricide, a terrible thing. But actually, it's a merciful mark to keep Cain from being killed. Why did God not want Cain to be killed? Is the punishment he's given him worse than death? I don't know. I don't know. Think of this, though. When Cain kills Abel, when Cain hits Abel, does he know he's going to kill him? No human being has died. He's never seen human death. It's true that Abel had killed a sheep, but did Cain know that if he hit his brother hard on the head, he'd die? Maybe it was manslaughter instead of first-degree murder. Is that what God is thinking of? I don't know. But it's important for the story that Cain be alive, because we're now going to see 2 lines of the generations coming from Cain, and then another from Seth, who is the 3rd son of Adam and Eve. And one seems to be the better line than the other, but I wouldn't push this too hard because it doesn't always work. But let's play with it a while. All right? Let's see what happens to Cain's line. Verse 17 of chapter 4, Cain knew his wife. Where did she come from? Was God making another creation in the next county? There's only supposed to be Adam and Eve and Cain. Now we have his wife. So clearly, we're not dealing with a factual story. We're dealing with a myth which left out something. It's telling a story about this family, but apparently there's somebody else around. I wouldn't pursue it because we haven't any idea where it will go. It may be just a loose end. A loose end in the Bible, something that doesn't make sense. Maybe the author just slipped. Oh my God, you can't say that. Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. Now let's look at the line of Cain and what they do. Cain's not a good guy. And he built a city. A city. Maybe a lot of the authors of the Bible were country people. And Jeremiah, he couldn't stand the cities. Isaiah was a city boy. But a lot of these were simple country prophets, and the cities were the big, bad, wicked places like people in Iowa might view New York. So the first thing Enoch, the son of the fratricide, does is to build a city. Maybe we should stay in the suburbs. And call the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. Well, maybe, is it Enoch who built the city or Cain who built the city? Is Enoch to Enoch Jr.? Probably Cain built the city. And he calls the name of the city Enoch after his son. To Enoch was born Irad, and Irad was the father of Mahalalel, and Mahalalel was the father of Methuselah, famous, and Methuselah, the father of Lamech. All right. Now, these begats were put in later by the author, the priestly author. Otherwise, we would go right from Cain and Abel to Noah. The stuff in between, and so begat so and so and so, they're trying to create a continuous narrative. And this was done much later. So we have the begats, and now we come down, we have a few generations which don't, oh, they built a city, that's interesting. But now we get to Lamech in verse 19. Now we're going to get into some interesting stuff. And Lamech took two wives. The name of one was Adah, and the name of the other Zillah. Adah bore Jabal. He was the father of those who dwell in tents and have cattle. Would that be the Bedouins? Again, it's explaining conditions at the time when this is written. And there were people who lived out in the desert, they had cattle, and they lived in tents. And so they come from this line. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all those who play the lyre and the pipe. So the lyre and the music isn't bad. Well, maybe the author thought it was. Some religions don't like it. But there is a dispute, even today, between Orthodox and Reform Jews on whether or not you should have an organ in the synagogue, whether you should have instrumental music. And we have a wonderful choice here. You want to hear wonderful music, go to KKBE Friday night at 7 p.m. They have a choir, they have an organ. There was a big dispute over that organ. If you want a traditional service with no instrumentation, you go to the Orthodox or even the conservative synagogue. So even now, when should you play music? Is it dispute? Is it good, or is it perhaps not so good? Get you all intoxicated and excited. Maybe that's bad. So Jubal was the father of those who play the lyre and the pipe. Didn't Handel wrote, "Oh, had I Jubal's lyre? If only had the lyre of Jubal, I could praise God." By the way, I want to stop for a moment and say that a great event is coming to Charleston, and it is part of my oratorio series. Before COVID, I sponsored 2 Handel oratorios on biblical themes. The first was Judas Maccabeus, which tells the story of Hanukkah, one of the great works of music. And the second was Israel in Egypt, which tells the story of the Exodus and the Passover. Now this year, we're doing Esther, which tells the story in the book of Esther in the Hebrew Bible, and how this one Jewish girl who is elevated to be queen of Persia saves her people at risk of her own life. And the Jews were saved from a wicked prime minister named Haman who wanted to kill us all, but we were saved. And it's a perfect holiday because it fulfills the Jewish message of holidays. They tried to kill us, we won, let's eat. So Purim is coming up. And right before Purim, on the Saturday night, the 4th of March, and Sunday afternoon at 2 p.m., the 5th of March, we are presenting Esther, the first English oratorio, and it's being done by the King's Counterpoint. The music will be absolutely gorgeous. So I urge you to come. And you can purchase tickets at the door. It's going to be at the Grace Church Cathedral on Wentworth Street at, I believe, 7 p.m. Saturday night, and then 3 p.m. at KKBE Temple on Sunday afternoon. And this is it's going to be magnificent. And most people only know Handel's Messiah. They haven't heard the dozen or more oratorios he wrote on Hebrew Bible themes. They're all glorious. And my project is to bring them all to Charleston. And now we're on our third. We're interrupted by COVID, but I'll keep mentioning it because it's something I don't want you to miss. To hear the words of the Bible set to the most beautiful music I believe ever written, I think Handel was the greatest composer, is an experience. And I want to share it with you. So do come, and I'll keep announcing it. And you'll see in your temple and some church bulletins, it's going to be announced. All right, let's get back to things. So now we have Jubal, father of music. And then Zillah, the other wife, bore Tubal-Cain. He was the forger of all instruments of bronze and iron. We're dealing with the end of the Bronze Age, the beginning of the Iron Age. And so they start using tools of metal. But no sooner had they started using metal tools than something terrible happened. And I'm going to decipher this because people find this very difficult material, but it's got to be read very carefully. All right. Zillah bore Tubal-Cain. He was the forger of instruments of bronze and iron. The sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. Now, verse 23. This is called the Song of the Sword. And Lamech, it's attributed to Lamech. Lamech said to his wives, Ada and Zillah, hear my voice. You wives of Lamech, hearken to what I say. Now that's called biblical parallelism. Two lines that mean the same thing. They're just repeated for the sake of the poetry. Ada and Zillah, hear my voice. You wives of Lamech, hearken to what I say. It means exactly the same thing, but it's repeated. And this is what Lamech says to his wives. I have slain a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. Again, the parallel repeats. If Cain is avenged sevenfold, truly Lamech 77-fold. It seems quite opaque, but it's not. It's accessible. And you have to remember that Cain, if you killed Cain, God would strike you in some way sevenfold. You'd be punished 7 times. Now they've invented tools of iron and bronze. No sooner than that happens, than Lamech comes home one evening and he says to his wives, you know what I did today? Somebody insulted me. Somebody wounded me. That might be physical or emotional. And I struck him down. I killed him. And it's a song of triumph. No sooner had they invented tools of iron and bronze than they used them to kill other people. That's our terrible human story. The song of the sword. And he comes home and they say, did you have a nice day, hubby? And he says, well, I killed a man. Why? Well, he insulted me. He insulted me. So, and now he's playing, excuse me. There's always somebody who calls. It's a song of arrogance. If God can avenge Cain 7 times, I can avenge myself 77 times. I'm more powerful than God because I have this sword of iron. And I struck this man down just because he did me some ill. Things are getting worse, folks. Now you have a man, Cain killed Abel, but he seemed to be ashamed of it. You know, he never said, I'm sorry. But he didn't gloat about it. Here, this man is gloating over committing a murder. He killed a young man who may have bumped into him. These things happen. We read about a story at McDonald's. Somebody bumps into somebody else, so the guy goes home, gets his gun, and blows the guy away. This crazy stuff. And this is the first occasion of it. And he's rejoicing in his power. I'm more powerful than God. Things are indeed spiraling downward. The line of Cain is getting, if anything, more corrupt. All right, so that's what that means. I avenge myself 77-fold. God can only do it 7-fold. Man, look, the serpent was a rival God. God struck him down. Man is becoming a rival God. We invent swords, guns, dynamite. We're God. And when J. Robert Oppenheimer saw the atomic bomb explode in the test, he said, he quotes the Hindu scriptures, now I am become death, destroying all things. Human beings become death in war and just in ordinary disputes. The papers are full of it. All right, everything's deteriorating. Let's continue. Verse 25. And Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and called his name Seth, the third son of Adam and Eve. And she says, God has appointed for me another child instead of Abel because Cain killed Abel. And to Seth, now this is another line. You have the line of Cain, which you see so far with Lamech, it's going downhill, violence and death. But now we have the line of Seth. To Seth also a son was born, and he called his name Enosh. So you have the line of Enoch coming from Cain, and now from Seth, who apparently is a good son. He hasn't killed anybody. Enosh, Enoch and Enosh. Look at the difference between the two lines. At that time, apparently when Enosh was around, men began to call upon the name, we would say Adonai today, but that is, of course, a placeholder for the Y-A-H-W-E-H word, which is we're forbidden to say, which comes from Yehieh, the one who is or shall be, and that's the name of God. They began to call on God by his personal name at this moment in the line of Enosh, who's a good guy. So one line of Enoch is going off and produces a murderer, but here we produce one who is intimate with God. Two possibilities, folks. We can be of the line of Enoch or of Enosh. I think the names are deliberately similar. God says to us, as he said to Cain, you have free will. Which line do you want to belong to? Both are human. Let's choose Enosh. We keep saying, but we don't do it. All right, so there you have the beginning, the earliest myths of our civilization, what are called foundational myths, and it establishes things the way they are today. And we have the same choices as Adam and Eve. We have the same choices as Cain. We can become murderers like the man who sings the Song of the Sword, Lamech, or we can call upon the name of the Lord like Enosh. Our choice. All right, now we go to chapter 5, which is written by the priestly author because you're going to see the name God, 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 not Lord. And he used the term God. And the priestly author, remember, wrote the 6-day story, the introduction before the Garden of Eden story. And then he wrote the begats, and now we're going to get lots of begats here. And most of them aren't terribly interesting, unless you want to dissect all the names, which I think is not what we want to do here. But let's see what we can make of it. And again, if it weren't for this, we would be catapulted to Noah, which is chapter 6, and there'd be no connective. So chapter 5 is written by the priestly author to give us a connected narrative, to be neat. P stands for priestly, but it can also stand for picky in my mind. Picky. You can't just have stories. You have to have every generation accounted. Genealogists are people like that. We owe them a great deal, but they're very picky. They want every. In my family, I say this, I suppose, with pride, but it's nothing I did. A genealogist in my family has traced the family back to 1520, where my ancestor was Tosfos Yom Tov Lippmann Heller, was the chief rabbi of Prague. And he can fill in every generation. That man was my 11 times great-grandfather. 1520. And it can be done. The way it was done in my family was this man was such a great man that somebody was interested in making the connections. So their names in each generation, and I know where I came from, at least going back that far. All right, chapter 5. This is the book of the generations of Adam. So here you have the priestly begat guy. He's filling in the begats. But you know it was written by the same person who wrote the 6-day story rather than the Adam and Eve story, because the references here are to the 6-day story. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. That's from the 6-day story. Male and female, he created them. That's a quote from the 6-day story. And he blessed them and named them man when they were created. Adam, earthlings. When Adam, the earthling, had lived 130 years, he became the father of a son in his own likeness, after his image, and he named him Seth. All right, now we're going this fellow's version of the line of Seth. Look at that. God created us in his image, and now we have Adam creating his son in his image. Something about the authority of the father, almost a godlike figure to a son. We should honor our fathers, perhaps as we honor God. And the days of Adam, after he became the father of Seth, were 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Thus, all the days of Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. I don't know what these numbers mean. Hebrew numbers all have a meaning, because they're made up originally of different letters in the alphabet. And 20, 30 has a meaning. 40 certainly repeats over and over in the Bible. These are schematic numbers that have a meaning which have largely been forgotten. 7, the 7-day week, the 7-branch menorah, all of this. So, but 930 years, I don't know. Seth had lived 105 years. He became the father of Enosh, and he lived 112 years, 912 years. So these are wildly exaggerated mythical numbers, but they all meant something at one time. Verse 9, Enosh produces Kenan at the age of 90. And then Enosh went on to live 905 years, and he died. Verse 12 of chapter 5. And Kenan, he lives 910 years. Verse 15, Emanu-El. He was the father of Jared. Jared's a very popular name, a Hebrew name among Jews today, but he's just mentioned here. We don't know anything about him. And then Emanu-El lived to 895 years, and he died. And then you have Jared, and he lives hundreds of years, and Enoch, another Enoch, and he does the same. Then Methuselah, in verse 27, lived 969 years, whatever that number means, and he died. And now we get to Noah. Verse 28. When Lamech had lived 182 years, he became the father of a son, and he called his name Noah, saying, out of the ground which the Lord has cursed, this one shall bring us relief from our work. Somehow Noah is going to try to fix the problem of the problems of humanity and make it all better in some way. That's the hope of his father. We've already seen Adam failed and Cain failed. Lamech certainly failed, singing all about killing somebody. And now we come to Noah. Maybe he can fix this downward spiral of disobedience and sin. We shall see. And now, that in verse 31, thus all the days of Lamech were 777 years, and he died, didn't live quite as long as his ancestors, but that's pretty good age. And Noah was 500 years old, and he became the father of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So the ages of the antediluvian figures echo pagan myth when you have the antediluvian kings, antediluvian meaning before the flood. Many ancient myths talk about this flood. And before the flood, people lived to these wild ages, according to the story. Afterwards, a little more normal. So I think we should stop here and begin the flood story, and goes from chapter 6 to chapter 9 next time. So we have time for any questions or comments, if anyone has them. Some of this material is difficult, but I've tried to unpack it as best I can. But if there's something that puzzles you, it probably puzzles someone else. So don't hesitate to ask.
Anybody have any questions? Pedro?
So, Michael, where do these, if this is a creation story, how do you reconcile the fact that there are other people out there that will slay Cain and that he marries one of them? It seems to be, a part is missing.
Yes, it's a loose end. Myths are never complete. They can't account for everything. And this writer is focusing on this family. And there is no answer to this. And where did Mrs. Cain come from? It's a loose end. Could he have just overlooked it? Well, of course, from the point of view of the Orthodox rabbis, the Torah is perfect and you can't make a mistake. But the fact is, it's written by people, and it seems people are capable of error. So I just think it's a loose end he just overlooked it. I don't know what else to say because it doesn't make sense. And it wouldn't have made sense all those years ago when it was written. And if it hasn't made sense all these years, and I don't know if anybody who's figured it out, there may be some religious texts and a lot of rabbinical texts, I don't know, this is thousands of, somebody may have tried to figure it out. Let me consult Rashi. Rashi is considered by traditional Jews to be the ultimate authority on the Torah. I'm not so sure. I think sometimes he misses the main point. But let's see what he said about that. It's a long time since I looked at him. And maybe he has some explanation. But I certainly don't. And again, all I would say is these are stories. And they can't be explained. They cover an awful lot of territory. And they really explain a great deal with great wisdom about the way human life is today. And what it explains it tells us this is the way it is. And this is the way it got. This is one author's idea of how things got to be the way they are. And the other author with the 6 Day story, as far as he's concerned, Pedro, There's no sin. Everything's very good. And that 6-day creation story, in the 7th day on the Sabbath, God rests and there's no sin and no disobedience. Everything's getting along perfect. And then you have a totally different author or school of authors writing the Garden of Eden story where everything gets screwed up. In the first story, sex is great. In the second story, it seemed to be forbidden. And both are true. As I've said, when your children reach an age of sexual self-understanding, that can create a lot of tension in the home between them and the parents. It's not that we don't want them to go out and become parents, but at the same time, sexual knowledge on the part of your children is somehow very difficult to deal with. And so the first story says it's great, and the second story says, you better watch out with that. And God apparently doesn't reveal that to them. The serpent does. Does sexuality bring chaos into life? Well, it certainly can, but at the same time, it enables the race to continue. So again, it's potential chaos that can be ordered. And we do, we get married and we say we can be with this woman, but not all those other women. That's the way. And remember, in the middle of the story of the Garden of Eden, it says, therefore shall a man leave his father and mother and cleave unto his wife, and they will become one flesh. Now, I don't know how that line got in. It's, of course, a lesson about marriage, how marriage is a good thing. One man and one woman. And all the people who oppose any alternative to that point to that and say, I believe in the Bible. They ignore, of course, the fact that the patriarchs and Moses had more than one wife. At least most of them did. So maybe, maybe one man, one woman is not the biblical pattern. It is here, but somewhere else it's something else. But look how you can, the man who wrote the 6-day story, didn't he know there were sins in the world? His story says everything's just wonderful. The Garden of Eden says, no, everything's just terrible. So remember the first line of Dickens' Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. That's true today and yesterday and tomorrow. I remember in high school, I wrote an essay saying the 14th century was a time of great strife. And Mr. Pearlstein, my wonderful teacher, circled, they said, every moment, every century, every year is a time of great strife. This sentence says nothing. But Dickens had it right. The worst of times, the best of times. So that story completely leaves out sin and error and mistakes. So what do we say to that fellow? He only wrote a partial myth. All right. Same thing with the Garden of Eden. Suddenly Mrs. Cain turns up and other people are around. So it turns out we're talking about a family, maybe not the whole human race. It's a story which sounds like it's talking about everybody, but it apparently is talking about one representative family. So who knows how the world really began and when human beings came upon the scene, and whether God said to the other people what he said to Cain, to Adam and Eve. I mean, you've got different stories. And each one of them tells us their idea, their point of view of what human life is all about. And they contradict each other because different writers are writing them. But even one writer can say it's the best of times and the worst of times. The best of times, the 6-day creation story. The worst of times, the messing up in the Garden of Eden. Both are true. Both are real. And we tell both stories because they fit our life today. And things are overall pretty orderly till, of course, we die. But that's orderly too, because we have our time in this world and we have to make room for the next generation. Suppose I don't want to die, but suppose I and everyone else who wants to live forever did. We'd overcrowd the world in one generation. Where would the new generations live? So it's an orderly world, even though the individual is here just for a while. And he may experience illness and death as chaos, but from the point of view of God, who's trying to get a next generation on the scene, we've got to make way for them. So generally there's order, but chaos is always threatening. And that's the way we live today. Everything's fine. And then suddenly a Chinese spy balloon appears, of all things. What do we do? And chaos. Or the war in Ukraine, chaos. Suddenly out of nowhere, there's a major war in Europe. First since 1945. Where did that come from? Chaos. And we try to restore order. So these are partial stories. We can't expect them to be complete. They're told from the points of view of the writers. They're full of great depth and wisdom and multiple meanings, but once in a while, there's a loose end. It doesn't matter in terms of the meaning of the story. It just matters in terms of our logical consistency. Where did those other people come from? Well, the meaning of the story is not affected. All right. Delighted to be here. I enjoyed this stuff. I was very interested to spend the week looking up all these references to fratricide. And now we get to Noah. Why was there a flood? Take a look at chapter 6. I would say there are two reasons given for the flood, because if you look carefully, you will find there are two stories of the flood, one by the P author and one by the J author, and they do not agree. How many animals went on that ark? 2 of each kind, or 2 of some kind and 7 of each kind of another kind? Different paragraphs, different numbers. Why was there a flood? Crucial issue. 2 reasons given, as I read it at least. And the result of the flood, afterwards, the promises God gave. There are 2 versions of it. So because you've got 2 stories that somebody thought he was helping by putting them together. So you have a paragraph of J, a paragraph P, J, P, and these 2 writers had different ideas. They both knew there was a flood. Everybody knew that, probably between the Tigris and Euphrates, which became for them a universal flood. But why? And who survived? And why did they survive? And all of that. So it's a great story, and we'll do it next week. So I will see you all next week. Bye-bye.